Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Thursday, August 14th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today will reach 89.4 degrees Fahrenheit with a low of 67.0, making for a warm and pleasant day. Be sure to stay hydrated if you're planning any outdoor activities. Later in the program, we'll investigate the specifics of who is slated for detention in Texas's newly established facility, shedding light on the new center's purpose. And we'll examine the potential ripple effect of California's recent self-checkout alterations on your household's grocery expenses, looking at what these changes mean for your wallet. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. We begin this morning with a significant development in the nation's immigration landscape, as a new and potentially historic immigration detention center is set to open its doors this weekend. For more on this, we turn to our reporter, Ethan Miller, who has been following the details closely. Ethan, tell us about this new facility.
Good morning, Grace. We're talking about a facility named Camp East Montana, located at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. It is scheduled to begin accepting migrants this weekend, specifically on Sunday, August 17th, 2025. That's just 3 days from now, Grace. Initial reports from NPR at 5:01 a.m. Eastern Time and KERA News NPR for North Texas at 4:03 a.m. Central Daylight Time, heard on their morning edition programs, highlighted the center's imminent operational status. The Trump administration is touting this facility as potentially the largest holding center in U.S. history, reflecting a massive expansion in our nation's immigration detention capacity.
Potentially the largest in history. That's a staggering claim, Ethan. What exactly is the purpose of Camp East Montana, and who will it be holding initially?
Well, Grace, this facility is part of the Trump administration's broader efforts to detain and deport migrants, as reported by DallasNews.com and TheGuardian.com, among other outlets. It is specifically intended to house single adults accused or convicted of crimes, as well as undocumented immigrants who are in removal proceedings or have final orders of removal. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. Officials have also indicated it will serve as a short-term processing center and facilitate so-called ICE air operations for deportations. Initially, Camp East Montana will house up to 1,000 detainees, with plans to dramatically expand its capacity to 5,000 over the next 2 years. Upon completion, Pentagon Press Secretary Kingsley Wilson stated, and I quote, "This will be the largest federal detention center in history for this critical mission, the deportation of illegal aliens," end quote. This quote was widely reported by DallasNews.com, TheGuardian.com, and ExpressNews.com.
That's quite an expansion plan. Ethan, who is behind the construction and management of this massive new facility, and have there been any concerns raised about the chosen contractor?
Indeed, Grace. The U.S. Department of Defense announced plans for the facility in July 2025. Acquisition Logistics, a Virginia-based firm, was awarded a contract reportedly worth $232 million up front, with a total value projected up to $1.26 billion, to build and manage this tent camp. However, concerns have been raised regarding Acquisition Logistics LLC's prior performance, as the Express.com and Substack.com have revealed. Prior to this agreement, Acquisition Logistics had no experience managing detention facilities. Their past government work primarily consisted of, and I quote, "modest administrative support services," end quote, with contract values generally under $2 million. This Fort Bliss contract, at a projected total of up to $1.26 billion, is approximately 442 times larger than their previous biggest federal contract.
442 times larger. That's a significant leap in scale for any company.
Absolutely. And if that were not enough, One of the subcontractors involved has reportedly been connected to a company that previously pleaded guilty to hiring undocumented workers and was found by the Department of Labor to have violated federal labor laws on a contract for housing Afghan refugees, resulting in nearly $16 million in recovered pay for workers, according to the Express.com and Substack.com. It seems this operation might be built on a foundation of shifting sands, Grace.
Shifting sands indeed, Ethan. One might even say it is a rather tentative plan, given the track record. But speaking of tents, the facility will be housing detainees in canvas tents. What can you tell us about the conditions within these structures, especially concerning the famously hot West Texas desert environment?
That's a critical point, Grace. While the U.S. Constitution's Fifth Amendment mandates basic human needs like shelter and medical care for civil detainees, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit has ruled conditions must be superior to convicted prisoners, there are significant concerns. Immigrant rights activists have voiced worries, and the El Paso County Commission is even expected to consider a resolution opposing the operation. KFFHealthNews.org has reported on issues with past tent facilities, including concerns that so-called soft-sided structures can experience internal temperatures 16 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit higher than external temperatures. That means on a 104-degree Fahrenheit day, the interior could soar to 120 to 129 degrees Fahrenheit, if not adequately cooled. The Legal Aid Society emphasizes the government's legal and moral obligations to protect detainees from extreme heat, requiring sufficient air conditioning and unrestricted access to water, as PrisonLegalNews.org has highlighted. Historically, ICE did not use tents for long-term detention prior to 2025.
Those are extremely concerning conditions, particularly the potential for such high internal temperatures. Finally, Ethan, while the administration justifies this facility for holding those accused or convicted of crimes, what does the broader data on ICE detention show about who is actually being detained?
Grace, that's a great question, and it highlights a significant discrepancy. The average daily population of all ICE detention facilities has seen a substantial rise, hitting around 59,000 individuals in June 2025, which TRACreports.org identifies as the highest recorded number in U.S. history. This surge has far exceeded the federally funded capacity of 41,500, being 140% over capacity in June 2025, according to TRACreports.org. The Trump administration has secured an additional $45 billion over 4 years, projected to increase ICE's detention capacity to at least 116,000 beds, as reported by the Fulcrum.us and DallasNews.com. But here's the critical detail. Despite the administration's justification that Camp East Montana is for so-called single adults accused or convicted of crimes, recent ICE data from June and July 2025 reveals that the vast majority of ICE detainees, between 71% and 84%, had no criminal convictions, or their convictions were for minor offenses like traffic violations. TRACreports.org and TheGuardian.com have uncovered this stark reality.
So not predominantly hardened criminals, as might be implied. Why the discrepancy?
Precisely, Grace. There are several factors at play here. Firstly, the Trump administration has significantly expanded its definition of what constitutes a, quote, criminal alien, including not only those convicted or charged, but also individuals who have committed acts that could be criminal offenses or simply entered the country without inspection, as appnews.com and DHS.gov have detailed. ICE's classification of criminality now includes, quote, other immigration violators, end quote, such as re-entry after deportation or unlawful entry. Secondly, the Laken-Riley Act, enacted in January 2025, broadened mandatory detention criteria to include individuals accused of many nonviolent theft-related offenses, even without conviction. Then, in July 2025, the Department of Homeland Security announced a policy to expand mandatory detention to anyone who entered the U.S. without documentation, denying bond hearings to millions previously eligible, as reported by DHS.gov and Vera.org. And thirdly, the Trump administration has set ambitious goals for daily arrests, aiming for, and I quote, the largest deportation program of criminals in the history of America, end quote, with ICE officers reportedly given quotas to arrest up to 3,000 people per day, according to the WashingtonPost.com. This aggressive push, coupled with expanded mandatory detention, fuels the immense demand for detention space. In fact, in June 2025, non-criminal arrests by ICE surpassed the number of arrests of people with criminal convictions or pending charges for the first time in nearly a decade, with a staggering 1,271% increase in the number of immigrants with no criminal history being arrested and detained by ICE since the beginning of President Trump's second term, as revealed by TheGuardian.com. Therefore, while Camp East Montana is publicly justified for housing so-called criminals, it is highly probable that a significant majority of its detainees will be individuals held primarily for immigration violations, many of whom have no convictions for non-immigration-related crimes, according to analyses by tracreports.org and TheGuardian.com.
Ethan, that's certainly a lot for our viewers to take in this morning. It sounds like Camp East Montana is poised to make a significant impact, for better or worse. Thank you for shining such a comprehensive light on this complex and evolving situation for us this morning. We truly appreciate your detailed reporting. That was reporter Ethan Miller, everyone. When we come back, we'll have our next story on. Welcome back. For our second story this morning, we are checking out a legislative effort that could dramatically alter your next trip to the grocery store. We are talking about potential changes to self-checkout lanes across California. Here to scan the situation for us is our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, tell us about Senate Bill 442 and what it proposes.
Grace. This bill, known as SB 442, is a new self-checkout regulation bill that aims to put more rules on how grocery and retail drugstores operate their self-service lanes. According to reporting from LAist and the Sacramento Observer, this legislative push is sponsored by Democratic Los Angeles Senator Lola Smallwood Cuevas. She chairs the Senate Committee on Labor and Public Employment and is a former labor organizer, which explains her strong ties to the bill's co-sponsors, the California Labor Federation and the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union. In fact, she has received nearly $30,000 in campaign contributions from these groups since 2021, as LAist and the Sacramento Observer have reported. This is actually a renewed, what some are calling, quote, watered down, end quote, effort after a similar union-backed attempt failed in the previous legislative session.
So it is a reattempt with a different flavor. What exactly are the key provisions of this new version of the bill? What would it mean for our shopping experience?
Well, Grace, if SB 442 passes, it would mandate several significant changes. First, stores would have to assign at least one dedicated employee whose sole duties are to monitor and assist customers at self-checkout machines, according to LAist. Second, stores must operate at least one traditional, manually staffed checkout lane at all times when self-checkout options are available. Third, self-checkout transactions would be limited to 15 items or fewer, with signs posted, though stores would not be penalized for failing to enforce this specific limit.
So no more trying to ring up your entire week's groceries at self-checkout. And what about those tricky, age-restricted items or those with security tags?
That is a big one, Grace. The bill expands the existing 2011 ban on alcohol sales at self-checkout to include any items requiring identification, like tobacco products, and anything with anti-theft security devices that an employee must remove. The Sacramento Observer points out that California is currently the only state that already prohibits all types of alcohol sales at self-checkout. Senator Smallwood Cuevas has expressed strong opposition to allowing alcohol sales at self-checkout, citing risks to communities, even though the California Grocers Association has suggested it could help offset new costs. Lastly, stores would need to notify employees and their unions in writing at least 60 days in advance before adding new self-service stations. Non-compliance there carries a penalty of $1,000 per violation per day.
That is quite a list of changes. There must be a lot of debate surrounding this bill. What are the main arguments from its proponents and opponents?
Absolutely, Grace. The debate is quite heated. Proponents, mainly Democrats and labor unions, argue that SB 442 will improve efficiency, ensure better customer service, and support workforce safety. They contend that self-checkout often creates a, quote, headache, end quote, for customers due to reduced staffing. They also emphasize its role in reducing retail theft, asserting that while self-checkout cut labor costs, it inadvertently led to understaffing and increased opportunities for theft, as a flash summary of sources including UFCW Western States Council indicates.
So, they believe it will actually curb theft. But what about the businesses? How are they reacting?
The state's business community, including the California Grocers Association and the California Retailers Association, strongly oppose the bill. They warn that these new regulations will significantly increase labor costs, which will inevitably be passed on to consumers as higher grocery prices in California, according to reporting from LAist and Lookout Santa Cruz. Daniel Conway, a lobbyist for the California Grocers Association, has argued that such regulations would drive up prices without improving the customer's shopping experience, as the Sacramento Observer noted. They also worry about overstepping businesses, authority, and hindering automation. Furthermore, there is concern that a new provision could encourage local municipalities to pass even stricter standards, creating a, quote, patchwork of laws, end quote, that would be difficult for multi-location stores to manage, according to LAist.
That is a weighty concern. The proponents are saying it reduces theft, while opponents are saying it increases costs. Let's delve into that a bit. How significant is self-checkout theft? And could reduced theft actually offset the new labor costs?
That is the core of the financial debate, Grace. National data indicates self-checkout machines are a substantial driver of retail theft. A flash summary of sources including Grabango and BlueBookServices.com notes they contribute to a, quote, shrink rate, end quote, which are losses from theft and error, of 3.5% of sales. That is more than 16 times higher than the 0.21% shrink rate at traditional cashier lanes. Some statistics suggest theft at these kiosks can be up to 4 times higher than at manned checkouts, as CSPDailyNews.com has reported. Overall, self-checkout machines are estimated to cost U.S. food retailers over $10 billion annually in lost profits due to what is called partial shrink, where shoppers pay for some but not all items.
$10 billion is a staggering number. So if theft is reduced, that could be a significant saving for stores.
Exactly. Proponents argue that by reducing this widespread retail theft, the bill could potentially offset the projected increases in labor costs, mitigating the rise in grocery prices. If SB 442 effectively reduces self-checkout theft, California grocers could potentially save an estimated $1.238 billion annually, based on California's share of the U.S. grocery market, according to a flash summary of sources including ibsworld.com. Some major retailers like Dollar General and Walmart have already started scaling back self-checkout in response to theft concerns, which suggests they see the cost of theft outweighing the labor savings. However, it is important to note that the specific estimated annual increase in labor costs for California grocers under SB 442 has not been publicly quantified, as a flash summary of sources including Legiscan.com reveals. For context, an economic analysis of the previous more stringent bill estimated an additional annual cost of at least $497.1 million for grocery retailers. While SB 442 is less stringent, increased labor costs are still anticipated.
So it is not a clear-cut case of whether the savings will balance out the new costs. What is the bill's legislative status right now, Chloe?
As of today, August 14, 2025, SB 442 has progressed significantly. It passed the Senate with a vote of 26-10, as LAist reported, and has advanced through Assembly committees, including the Assembly Labor and Employment Committee. It is currently awaiting a final hearing in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, according to LAist and the Sacramento Observer. The bill was placed on the suspense file after its first hearing on July 9, 2025. Lawmakers are expected to return from their summer recess on August 18, 2025, which is just 4 days from now. After that, it will need to clear the Assembly Appropriations Committee to advance to the Assembly floor for a full vote. Governor Gavin Newsom's office has not yet taken a public position on the bill.
We will certainly be keeping a close eye on this one. Thank you for bagging all these important details for us, Chloe.
My pleasure, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Tensions are flaring in Eastern Europe as fighting in and around Ukraine has dramatically intensified just a day before a high-stakes summit between the U.S. and Russian presidents in Anchorage, Alaska. The talks are aimed at settling the Ukrainian crisis. But as diplomats prepare to meet, the fighting is anything but diplomatic. Russian forces have reportedly made a tactical breakthrough in the Donetsk region and have unleashed a record number of glide bombs and nearly 400 drones in a single week. Ukraine is striking back, launching its own drone attacks on the Russian cities of Rostov-on-Don and Belgorod, injuring at least 16 people and setting fire to oil refineries. The fierce escalation is casting a long shadow over the summit, with European and Ukrainian officials worried that a deal could be struck at Ukraine's expense. President Zelensky, however, has adamantly rejected any proposal that involves surrendering Ukrainian territory. Meanwhile, we look at the grim reality in Afghanistan 4 years after the Taliban returned to power. The group's initial promises of moderation have been replaced by the systematic erasure of women from public life. Girls are barred from secondary and university education, and women are prohibited from most jobs and must be accompanied by a male guardian to travel. The nation is also facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, with more than half the population needing assistance and a healthcare system on the verge of collapse. The crisis is compounded by the forced return of over 2 million Afghans from neighboring countries, straining already scarce resources. While the Taliban control the country, a UN report warns that over 24 terrorist groups are operating from its soil. Here in the U.S., a legal battle is brewing in rural Texas, where a bumper crop of indictments has emerged from a vote harvesting probe. 9 people, including a former mayor and the chief of staff for a state representative, have pleaded not guilty to felony charges. They are accused of illegally paying individuals to collect and drop off other people's absentee ballots. The wide-ranging investigation is being led by the state's Republican Attorney General. But defense lawyers and activists argue the probe is politically motivated and that the state's vote harvesting law is unconstitutionally vague. If convicted, the defendants could face up to 10 years in prison. And finally, a story of political ambition turned to violent crime. A former Republican candidate in New Mexico who couldn't win at the ballot box has learned his fate for trying the bullet box. Solomon Peña has been sentenced to 80 years in federal prison for orchestrating a series of drive-by shootings at the homes of Democratic officials after his landslide election loss in 2022. Prosecutors say Peña was driven by false claims of a rigged election and recruited 2 men to carry out the attacks. While no one was hurt, bullets did pierce the bedroom of a state senator's 10-year-old daughter. Peña's lawyer says he will appeal the conviction. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 4.0, Gemini Pro 2.5, Gemini Flash 2.5, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.